Hello, everyone. This is Ava Montoya from the Illinois Student Assistance Commission. And today with me, I have my colleague, Sarah Carter, and we're going to talk about the alternative application for Illinois financial aid and give you some tips on completing the application. So, Sarah, you want to just say a few words?
Sure. Hi, everyone. As Abel said, thank you for introducing me. My name is Sarah Carter. I am one of the core members working for ISAC with financial aid outreach.
Okay. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the alternative application and then hopefully give you some insight as to how we can get the application completed in a way that makes it easier for everybody. Before we do that, though, I just want to give you a little bit of history as to this application and how it came to be. So many of you may be familiar with what's called the RISE Act. The RISE Act was a law that was passed last year, but went into effect this January 2020. And what that did is that it enabled certain individuals that previously weren't eligible for the MAP grant to become eligible. So when it became available January 2020, that was for the 2020-2021 year. And currently, right now, the application for the 2021-2022 year is currently available. And this application is specific to students who like I said, aren't eligible for federal aid. Because for students who are eligible for federal aid, what they should be doing is filling out the FAFSA, which is the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And the FAFSA itself, to qualify for it, the student has to be a U.S. citizen, a U.S. permanent resident. The status of the parents doesn't matter. It's all about the status, the eligibility of the student, and when they're being considered for financial aid. Now, when the RISE Act was put into place, it said that individuals who are not eligible for federal aid and who meet other very specific criteria could fill out this alternative application for financial aid and be considered for the MAP grant. That's one of the main components. It also enables public universities to give students additional monies from their pockets. But I'm going to speak solely from the perspective of the MAP grant. And for those of you who are not familiar with the MAP grant is an appropriation. It's a need-based grant that's given to students based on the money appropriated from the General Assembly to the state, in this case, ISAC, and we administer that grant to students who are eligible, and it's based on financial need. So just like the FAFSA, the alternative application asks for very specific information when students are considered. Now, who qualifies for the alternative application? Well, there's two main groups. The first is students who are undocumented. Now, in addition to being undocumented, they need to meet very specific criteria, okay? So the student needs to have resided with his parent or guardian while they attended an Illinois public or private high school. So they have attended Illinois public or private high school and live with a parent or guardian. Then the individual has to have graduated, the student has to have graduated from the high school or received the equivalent of a high school diploma. Now, during that time in K through 12, the student needs to have been in 3 years worth or 3 years of school at a minimum. Okay, so it doesn't have to all be in high school. It could be, K through 12 system. So we're talking grammar school, we're talking middle school, as long as it's 3 years. The other piece is that the student needs to sign an affidavit saying that once the student is eligible, they're going to apply for U.S. permanent residency. Right? So it's not a saying that you have to go out and do it right now. It's just saying that if the student ever does become eligible to apply for U.S. permanent residency, they promise to do so. That's all it's saying. And the application itself, it's a box that you click saying that you promise to do that. And then the last piece is the student has not established residence outside the state of Illinois. So if a student who's undocumented who meets all that criteria, they are eligible to apply through the alternative application to be considered for the MAP grant. The other category of students that become available for the MAP grant via the alternative application are students who are transgender, who were born male at birth and now have transitioned, but have not registered for selective service. What happens is at the federal level is that all males between the ages of 18 and 25, with few exceptions, have to register for selective service, otherwise they're ineligible for federal aid. Right? So if a student was born male, does not register for selective service, has transitioned, they can apply through the alternative application and be considered for the MAP grant. In both cases, they're not going to be eligible for federal aid. But yes, they will be considered for the MAP grant. Okay. Now, so that's the first piece, determining who can actually apply and be considered for the MAP grant. With the application itself, there's a few things that that I encourage people to do just to make sure that they don't have too many issues completing the application itself. There's a few differences between the FAFSA and the alternative application. Now, keep in mind that there's actually more similarities between the alternative application and the FAFSA in regards to the questions, okay? It asks a lot of the same information because just like the FAFSA, what the alternative application is going to do is going to look at take a snapshot and look at the money coming into the household and the money leaving the household, all right? And that's going to be used to determine what is the ability of the family to pay for college. And it's going to come up with an EFC, an expected family contribution. So in addition to the income, just like the FAFSA, they'll also look at certain assets. So they look at that snapshot, and then that information is sent to colleges in Illinois that the student indicates on the form. And that's the other piece. With this form, it's confidential. Students are concerned about to whom are we going to release this information. We only release the information to the students who fill it out. So we send them a summary. And then the other piece is that on the alternative application, just like the FAFSA, the student can indicate the colleges to which they wish to send their information. So the student needs to indicate which colleges. And the colleges are only colleges in the state of Illinois. And you may ask, well, why is that? Well, because the MAP grant can only be used in the state of Illinois and only be used in MAP approved colleges. So that would include all the community colleges, all the public universities, all the not-for-profit private institutions. We're talking about 139 or so colleges in the state of Illinois. So there's still quite a number of colleges to which they can send their information. Just like the FAFSA, the questions are going to ask, look at all that. It's sent to the colleges, and the colleges takes that information. And after student's been admitted, they work up an award letter and send it to the student. Okay. But unlike the FAFSA, the alternative application currently doesn't have any skip logic ingrained in it. So that means that with the alternative application, if a question isn't applicable, skip it. All right, don't answer it. All right. Now some may say not applicable because they tweaked it a little bit for certain students. Some of the questions may say that, but if it doesn't apply, skip it, because if you inadvertently click an answer, you probably will not be able to unclick it. All right. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, if you click it inadvertently, it's okay. The college may say later on, hey, what did you mean by this? You just have to explain I inadvertently clicked it. And as a slight tangent as an aside, if there's ever any issues, work with your college office, the financial aid office to tell them, what your situation is, regardless of whether you had a question about the application or you have some exchange circumstances. Always communicate. That's just an aside, and that's the case whether you fill out the FAFSA or the alternative application. With the alternative application, do not use the phone. Okay, you have to use a laptop. Okay, I know that the FAFSA has a mobile app. We currently do not have a mobile app for the alternative application, and you should not use your phone because it just doesn't work the same. Right? With the alternative application, just like the FAFSA, when you start for the first time, you click where it says, first time applicants, or start here. All right, and then subsequent times you can log in. Now, with the alternative application, make sure you need to provide an email. The student provides an email and the parent provides an email. For the student, make sure that email doesn't expire. That's always, an issue if a student uses an email, like a school email. Say they're in high school, they use a school email, the student graduates, then the email stops working because the school cuts it off. So don't use an email that will expire. And make sure it's also an email that's professional, because the colleges will be communicating with the student via that email. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, we do have on ISAC's website a student portal. So if a student previously created an account through our student portal, you can't use the same email. It has to be a different email. So we encountered that in a few instances, because what's going to happen in the student portal, we have a number of resources. And then for college students later on, through our student portal, you can actually see how many MAP credits you've actually used up. Okay. With the email address, the email that the parent uses and the email that the student uses, they have to be different. They cannot be the same. Okay. So don't use the same email because it'll cause some issues down the line. with the application, with the alternative application, students will not be asked for a social security number. Okay, because many students may not have a social security number. We're not going to ask for a social security number, but instead, once a student starts filling out the application, they'll be assigned what's called an ISAC ID number. Make a note of that. Write that number down, because you may have to reference it later when either you're talking to a college office, or if you have some issues with your application, we may ask you what's your ID number. It will speed things up in regards to getting any situations rectified. Okay. Another thing that I've seen that kind of causes things to be delayed is when students or parents don't file a tax return, but they're supposed to file a tax return. Right. What happens is there's a minimum. I'll have to preface this by saying I'm not a tax expert. Okay, I'm just giving you the very bare minimum. If you have any tax questions, make sure you talk to a qualified tax preparer. With tax returns, when individuals make above a certain threshold, they have to file a tax return. Okay, I believe for parents, if they're married filing jointly, I think the threshold is like $24,800 or around that threshold. If you're a single parent, we're talking $12,400 or so. So around there. So if someone makes north of that, at that or north of that, they have to file a tax return. And I've seen situations where parents get stuck because they're like, hey, the college is asking for a tax return transcript, but I didn't file a tax return. What does that mean? It means the student's stuck in their verification process. And when the student's stuck in the verification process, financially will not be dispersed. Okay? Because if a college says, hey, we want to verify your income, please send us a tax transcript. And if you don't have one because you didn't file a tax return, it causes problems. Okay. Now, if someone makes below those thresholds or isn't required to file a tax return, they can just show records of income, whether it's a W-2 or any type of documentation to show the college that you were, this is what you were made. Because remember, the alternative application is trying to determine what is the ability of the student to pay for college. That's it. And the colleges use that to package a student. The other thing too with the parents, if you're parents or if you're a parent, I've seen tax return issues when somebody files head of household but they're married, and that's problematic because head of household there are 3 criteria for head of household. First of all, you have to be unmarried. So if you're married, you don't qualify right off the bat. The second criteria is that the one person has to provide the majority of the financial support for the household, basically more than 50%. So 2 people in the same household can't provide more than 50%. And then the third thing is that someone has to have a dependent. So all 3 criteria have to be met. So when the parents are married and each files a head of household for whatever reason, they have to go back and amend their taxes. So those are common issues that I've seen with the alternative application, and also with the FAFSA, to be perfectly honest, in regards to students getting tripped up and causing issues with the submission or processing of the application. Now, with the parents on the alternative application, you'd also will not be asked to provide a social security number. Now, parents, if your student was born in the U.S., they're a U.S. citizen, so they should be filling out the FAFSA. And if you don't have a social security number on the FAFSA, make sure you enter all zeros. Do not use your ITIN. ITIN is individual taxpayer identification number. Okay, don't use that. That's only for tax returns. Which kind of, let's say, if I can digress a bit, when individuals say, well, how do I file a tax return? Because I made this much money, but I don't have a social security number. You just get an ITIN, which is an individual taxpayer identification number from the IRS. It's free to get. Just talk to your tax preparer. They can get one for you. And that's how you get your tax return filed. And for the IRS, all they really care about is making sure you file your tax returns properly. Okay. Now, with the FAFSA, you have to use what's called an FSA ID to sign it and to use it for the IRS data retrieval tool. With the alternative application, we don't have the IRS data retrieval tool in it. So information has to be entered manually. But also, you sign it via a PIN. And the PIN is going to be a 4-digit number that's going to be emailed to the student and to the parent so they can sign the form when it's all said and done. Okay? So that's a very big difference between the FAFSA and the alternative application. You get that PIN, it's a 4-digit number, and you use it to sign the form itself. Okay? And then at the end, there's going to be a certification affidavit screen. And this is where this is near the end, and this is enabled after the application is signed by the student and the parents if the parents reporting information. So you get to the end, there's going to be student signature, the student signs with their pen, and the next screen is going to be the parent signs with their pen, and actually then you have to hit prior to get to the previous screen where you get to the affidavit to actually submit it. So that's sometimes that could be a little confusing for students and for parents. With the form itself, just like the FAFSA itself, before you submit it, take a look at it. Make sure you review the information, review the summary to make sure there aren't any issues with, make sure you fill out the information correctly. A couple of things that I've seen happen that has caused delays with the processing would be if, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. When they're navigating from page to page, instead of hitting the next or prior button, they hit the back arrow at the browser at the top, and that causes people to get out of the application, and they may lose the information that they just entered. So periodically, make sure that you save the information. Okay. With the alternative application, I would encourage students to list as many colleges as possible. Let me rephrase it. If you're thinking about perhaps applying to a college, list it. There's nothing wrong with listing colleges to which you haven't applied, because all the college is going to do is they're just going to hold that information. Okay, they're not going to do anything with it until as soon as actually applied for admission and actually it's also been admitted. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind, because the colleges they have quite a bit on their plate with all the current students. So then they just hold on until as soon as they actually apply and been admitted, and they work up the award letter, and then they send it to the students. If you ever have any issues with your application and you need to talk to the college about it, say you don't get an award letter. Okay? Say you submitted your application, you've been in your alternative application, you've been admitted to the college, but you haven't yet received your award letter. When you contact the college to find out what the award letter is, if they say they haven't received your information, make sure that they know that you submitted an alternative application, not a FAFSA, because from the college side, the mechanics are a little bit different. With the FAFSA, their information gets automatically it's downloaded into their student information system at the financial aid office. But the alternative application is a little bit more of a manual process in that the college needs to retrieve that information from ISAC so they can pull it and then work up the award letter. So when you communicate with the college, make sure that if they say, well, we haven't received it, and you sent it and you listed them as a college, make sure that that you're talking about the alternative application. So just keep that in mind. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, by all means, feel free to add them in the comments that we have here. Sarah, just out of curiosity.
What was that, Abel? You're muted, Abel.
Sorry. Have you seen any questions or comments that have come up this way so far?
No questions so far. I'll keep an eye out.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you. The other thing too is with the alternative application, it's going to ask you for very specific information. It's going to ask you for information from 2019. Because what happens is when you apply for the year that the student will be in college. So I mentioned earlier that the alternative application for the 2021 year opened up in January. And now this October, it opened up for the 21-22 school year. Okay, so we have both out there. So say you're a high school senior right now. You're going to fill out the application for the 21-22 year, not the 2021 year because you're currently still in high school. Okay, so always apply for the year in which you will be in college. Now that application, the 21-22 application, is going to ask you for income information from 2019. It's called prior. They're going to ask for the income from 2 years ago. Now, if you filled your tax return, you're sure have that information handy. Now, what happens is sometimes the situation of the family changes. In 2019, maybe the income was pretty good, and the pandemic hit, and 2020 is just a mess. The income dropped significantly. People don't. The income they're making is very different from 2019. You still have to enter the information from 2019 and the 21-22 alternative application. But what you do is you talk to the college office and explain your situation. This could be because somebody maybe lost their job, they got laid off. A litany of things could have occurred. Somebody's, had some serious medical issues and expenses. You communicate with the college office. You explain your situation to them, and they have something called professional judgment, where they can look at your particular situation. They may ask for documentation to basically verify that that's actually the case, and they can use that then to maybe redo the award letter, because they understand that the income information in 2019 is not the same as 29 and 2020. They always take that into account, because ultimately the forms, all they're trying to ascertain is what is the ability of this family to pay for college. What is it that they can afford? And because the perspective from financial aid is that the student is primarily responsible to pay for his or her education, and the assumption is that the parents will contribute some money towards it. So say the college costs this much and the family can afford this much, that gap is what financial aid is supposed to be. And that's what colleges are trying to figure out how they can use the how they can bridge that gap via the award letter. So always communicate with the college, so hopefully that gap is bridged. The other questions that we get come in regards to some people say, hey, my EFC is pretty high. The college says I can afford $20,000 a year, something like that, but my parents hardly make any money. What's going on here? Sometimes mistakes are made in what they report as assets. There are three things you want to exclude as an asset on the forms: the alternative application and the FAFSA. The first is you don't report the home in which you live. Okay, you exclude that. That doesn't count. That's your primary residence. You don't count that. Okay. Second would be any retirement plan. So we're talking 401ks, IRAs, pension plans. The value of those plans for the parents, you do not report, because that's for their retirement. And if the parents are a business owner, they have a family business, and they have 100 or fewer full-time employees, you do not report the value of that business. So sometimes the EFCs will be inflated if someone inadvertently reports the equity in their home, or they report the value of a 401k that have with work. Don't report that, because that'll inflate your EFC. Now, the other thing too that I've seen is that with families is that they don't know which parental information to report, because the parents may be separated or divorced. Okay. Now, when that happens, when the parents are separated, they're not living together. Okay? Whether they're still technically married, but the marriage is over, so they live separate lives, that's fine. It's still separated. You don't have to be legally separated. When the parents are separated, divorced, the student will report the information of the parent with whom they lived the longest in the last 12 months. Okay. Now, if the parents say it is exactly the same, 6 months for the one, 6 months for the other, if that's exactly a tie, then the next criteria is which parent provided the most financial support. Okay. Now, every once in a while, somebody says, hey, but you're not going to believe it. It's exactly the same. Well, then I tell them, well, whoever has the highest income, and then they're like, oh, wait a minute, I know there's 365 days in the year. They live slightly more with that person. We're not telling you how to report it. Well, actually, we are telling you how to report it. We're not telling you which parent to report. We're telling you how to report it. It's the parent with whom you lived the longest in the last 12 months. The other thing is sometimes students think, or parents think, that if they don't claim a student as a dependent on the tax return, they're not considered independent, that they can be considered independent on the FAFSA or the alternative application. That's not the case. Okay. How the parent claims student, whether dependent or not dependent, it doesn't matter. The criteria that's used is, do the students meet certain criteria? If they don't meet it, then they have to provide parental information. And that criteria is very, very specific. We're talking the student has to be 24 years of age or older. The student is married. The student has dependents that they support financially and provide the majority of the support. The student's a veteran. The student's pursuing a graduate degree. The student is in legal guardianship as determined by a court. So they need to provide the court decision. The student is emancipated minor determined by a court. Once again, provide the court decision. Or the student is homeless, or the risk of being homeless and unaccompanied, so not in the presence of the parent. Unless someone meets any one of those criteria, parental information will have to be provided. Okay, so keep that in mind.
Okay, but we've got a couple questions in the chat or in the comment section. The first one you touched on a little bit, but it's if the student is a U.S. resident, do you file the FAFSA or both the FAFSA and the alternative app?
Good question. So if student is a U.S. resident, a U.S. permanent resident, they fill out the FAFSA. Do not fill out both, okay? Because that'll cause confusion for the college. So U.S. permanent residents fill out the FAFSA. If the parents don't have residency, first of all, on the FAFSA, they do not ask for the residency of the parents, okay? All they ask is for your name, date of birth, and social security number. And if you don't have a social security number, enter all zeros. You may get an error message. Just click check for errors, and they'll let you go through to the next screen.
Great. And then one more question at the moment. If you do have a second house, how do you go about reporting that?
Very good. So if you have a second property, say you have a rental property, what you do is you take the value of that home, subtract the debt, and the difference is the net worth. So report the net worth. If the net worth is a negative number, it's zero. Okay, but that's only for the second property. Now, say you have your residence is an apartment building. Okay, it's a 5-unit apartment building. Okay, and you rent out. You live in one unit. You rent out the other four units. Okay, and you rent them out to non-family members. Then you take 4/5 or 80% of the equity. So you have to do more math. Okay, but that's only in case you live in a multi-unit building in which you rent one or more of the other units to a non-family member. If you just rent it to a family member, it doesn't matter. That's still, then you don't have to report it. But for the second properties, we take the value and subtract the debt, and then report the net worth as an asset. Other questions?
That's it at the moment. I'll let you know if anything else comes in.
Okay, very good. The one we had a few more minutes left. We were only going to go half an hour. The one thing I just want to mention real briefly is about 529 plans. If you're the parent and you own a 529 plan, that counts as an asset. Now, if say you have a non-parent that has your kid as a beneficiary, for example, I have a niece. I love her dearly. So when she was born, we started a 529 plan for her. Okay. I am and you can start a 529 plan for whomever you wish. And interestingly enough, in the state of Illinois, you don't have to be a U.S. citizen or U.S. permanent resident to open a 529 plan. You just have to have an ITIN. Okay, so keep that in mind. So parents, if you have really young kids out there, look into it, because with a 529 plan, if I may for just a moment, it's basically a specific type of educational savings account. And as long as the proceeds of that account is used for qualified educational expenses, the owner does not pay taxes on the interest that accrues. Okay, so it's a way by which to make your dollar stretch a little bit more. And there's one in the state of Illinois. There's actually a few. There's the prepaid tuition plan. There's the Bright Start and the Bright Direction. With any of those plans, if you participate, you actually can lower your tax liability for the state of Illinois, depending on your specific situation. So parents, look into that. Talk to your financial advisor, or talk to the folks at the Treasurer's Office of the state of Illinois, and to inquire more about the process for that. So back to my situation. I have a plan for my niece, right? But when she goes to college, she will not report the value of that plan that I have for her, because I'm not the parent, I'm the uncle. She would only report any money given to her, and I give it to her later on. Likewise, if my son goes to college right now, and I have one for my son and got one for my niece, I would have to report both of them, because I am the owner and I am the parent of my son, and my son would be filling out the FAFSA or the alternative app. Well, he was born here, so he'd be filling out the FAFSA for his situation, but that would be considered an asset. If the 529 plan is owned by the grandparents, it's not considered an asset, because remember, it's just the student and the parents. So just kind of keep that in mind. Yeah. Very good. So we have like one more minute. I'm just going to check with Sarah, see if she has any more questions.
No more questions right now.
All right, very good. Well, hopefully this information will help students and parents with filling out the alternative application and have fewer issues or problems with the questions. There's lots of questions. If you ever need any assistance filling out this form, feel free to contact us at ISAC. You can go to our student portal and connect with one of my core members, such as Sarah. We have core members across the state of Illinois, and they can work with you one-on-one virtually, either like this teleconferencing, over the phone or email. And you go to studentportal.isac.org/ISAC core, ISACORPS. So that's studentportal.isac.org/ISACORPS. Connect one of them. All you have to do is get to that page, type in your zip code, and then hit enter, and then the contact information for the core members nearest you will show up. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, to those that joined us. And for those of you reviewing this later, once again, if we can be of any assistance, please let us know. Thank you so much, and everyone have a wonderful evening. And thank you, Sarah.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.